You poured the brandy, baby, dressed the tree. I got the table looking Christmassy. Wrapped up.
Hey everyone, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum. And this month we are taking a break from covering franchises and we're settling down with some of our favorite one-off holiday horror movies. So for this week's selection, we have decked ourselves out in our finest outfits. We have set the table with only the most posh of our silverware, and there will absolutely be charades. We are talking about the 2021 pitch black horror comedy, may have to put that last word in quotes, Silent Night, written and directed by Miss Camille Griffin. And I am not alone for this one. How can you host a dinner party for one? Would not be much fun at all. I am joined once again by the host of the Bodies of Horror podcast, available on the Anatomy of a Scream podcast network, Miss Nicole Goebel. Nicole, how are we doing?
Doing great. So pumped to talk about this movie.
Excellent.
Incredible.
And joining us again, he is the co-host of the Spectre Cinema Club podcast, Mr. Devon Taylor. Devon, how are we doing?
I'm doing good. I love how last week I said I'm the Scrooge of the group, but yet here I am for my second holiday episode.
You, I think, are here for almost all of them.
I'm still up in the air for Krampus. We'll see, because I might have a thing, but yeah, I might be here for the whole run, which is kind of funny. Yeah, because like even though I don't love Christmas, I do find a lot of Christmas horror that I like, and maybe that's why, because like it's like the darker spins on the holiday that like feels a little bit more accurate to me than just like the bubbles and gumdrops of regular Christmas movies.
Christmas movies in general can be a lot of fun. They can be a bit saccharine, depends on what you find, and it is definitely a cottage industry. Like there's Hallmark, there's like that is a whole cottage industry at this point. But then there's just like kind of like fun side Christmas movies. Like technically like Rambo First Blood is a Christmas movie. Like it takes place at Christmas season. Like there is a season's greetings sign up there in the police district. Die Hard, obviously, Christmas movie. Home Alone is a Christmas movie. Home Alone 2 is a great Christmas horror movie, I would argue.
Shout out Macaulay Culkin just got his Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame.
And what a lovely speech, like absolutely, like no shade, like beautiful speech that he gave to his fiance, like shouting her out, like well-deserved. Shocked he didn't have a star already. And, like I think we're ready for more Macaulay Culkin, like definitely... ready for more of him. Like his younger brothers have gone on to also have great careers. Like Rory McCulkin has done some pretty fantastic work in the past few years with Succession and Lords of Chaos. So we're ready for it. I'm ready for a Home Alone movie where like he's in his 40s and maybe there's some PTSD and he has the house set up with traps on Christmas and the family has to kind of avoid them and talk him down from the ledge a little bit. Like, I want that. Give me that comedy.
Yeah, and he's been getting more and more back into acting because I know that he, had a lot of personal struggles there for a while. I actually saw him in concert when he was touring with the Pizza Underground.
That's awesome. Which
was a Velvet Underground cover band, and he played a pizza box. And
when you say he played a pizza box, like as an instrument, or he played the role of a pizza box?
No, he played it as an instrument.
It's amazing.
And they retooled some of the lyrics to be about pizza. So it was a lot of fun. But he was on a recent season of American Horror Story. So, he's, dare I say, dipping his toes back into a little bit of horror. So it would be great to see him pop up.
Yeah. All this is to say, I know this year we're doing Muppet Christmas Carol as our non-horror Christmas Day drop. And I'm going to lobby hard next year to maybe make Home Alone the Christmas Day movie that we do. 'Cause no irony. I love Home Alone. I think that movie is brilliant. It's so much fun. And I didn't watch it until I think my 40s. Because it came out right when I was a teenager, so I kind of missed that sweet spot. I saw Uncle Buck in theaters and thought oh, what a cute kid. But Home Alone was I was a little bit too old for it, growing up, and didn't really catch it until I had a kid. And what a delight that movie is. So I think next Christmas season, that might be the drop that we do. And I don't know, maybe we'll do a commentary in the Patreon this year. Who knows? Just spitballing. But let's talk about this movie this week. Let's talk about 2021's Silent Night, which is ironic we're doing it this week because there is another Silent Night that is out. John Woo making his return to American cinemas with a Christmas movie, a Christmas action movie, Silent Night. So here we go. But Devon, you were the one that brought this one to the table. When we were discussing which movies we should cover for our one-offs, this was one of your picks. And I'm curious, what was it about this movie that really called out to you?
Yeah, I mean, aside from us, hopefully capitalizing on some SEO of John Woo's movie, way too many films named Silent Night. Way too many of them. Though this one, I think it plays into it really well. But I love the idea of an end of the world party. The way that this is kind of set up for it. And I remember whenever it was announced, and I was like, "Oh, I feel like this is gonna really be a Christmas party for a Christmas movie for me because it's gonna be super dark." And it ended up being in my top 10 of that year of 2021. It was it's a fascinating watch to kind of watch these people still kind of go through some of the social niceties of Christmas, even given the circumstances. But then as that kind of washes away throughout the film. It's a very darkly humorous film with a fantastic ensemble, and I think it really juggles the tones really well of kind of keeping you in one place, and then they'll drop kind of a bomb on you, and then it lifts back up for a minute, and then we go back to the dark stuff, and of course, just the timing of when this came out, post COVID pandemic and stuff, and well, not even post, this was still kind of came out whenever we were still kind of dealing with a lot of stuff going on with it. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting parallel to the things that were going on. So I really love this film.
2021 feels like such a blur. It feels very hard to conflate a lot of what was going on in that year. It feels like a lost year in a lot of ways. So, Nicole, how about yourself?
Yeah, I heard about this and was really excited when it dropped. I knew that it was produced by Matthew Vaughn, and I like a lot of his stuff. So I was looking forward to this. This ended up being an outdoor movie night with one of my friends. He is really great about my, kind of deal with him that he will come over, I will pick the movie, we'll play a game where I make it seem like he has a choice, but he doesn't. And I'll be like, oh, well, what about this movie? It just dropped and it would be really cool to watch it. And he's like, fine, you have the remote, so I guess.
Meanwhile, you're hitting play on it already.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, what's that? Oops. So yeah, I love Christmas horror because I love the juxtaposition. I think it's an acknowledgement of how hard this time of year can be for a lot of folks on an emotional and mental level. It's supposed to be a really celebratory time, and I think in a lot of ways it is, but it's also really draining. And I think that this film tackles so much in a pretty compact time. I think I had mentioned that in the past with a couple of shorter films, but I feel like I feel like we've covered some really good films that really know how to take some interesting narrative pieces and make the most of them without it feeling really bloated.
Mm-hmm.
And the performances in this film, I watched it again early this morning. And wow, it's just, I get more and more impressed with this film the more I watch it.
Excellent. So I had heard about this movie via Lindsay when we were doing the show together. Like, she had mentioned it as part of like one of our like 3-Up series where we talk about like new movies we had caught, and she had the opportunity to see it as part of its debut at the Toronto International Film Fest, and she loved it, and I was genuinely excited to check it out, like based on her recommendation, because I typically love like very awkward British humor because it's just an area they excel at. Like, I love shows like The Mighty Boosh, Faulty Towers. I was weaned on, like, growing up and listen to Dr. Demento just to catch little bits of Monty Python. I love Peep Show, like things like that. So I love that style of humor, and I'm not sure if they quite landed the tone it was going for at times. Like, that definitely caught this, and I'm like, ooh, see what they were trying to get to. Don't quite know if it hit the mark for me. But I was still really excited to talk about this movie when it was put on that list, because there is a lot to talk about here. And I have these really weird mixed feelings about this movie. Because when I finished my rewatch of it last night, I shut off my television thinking, like, I hate this movie. Like, hate it, hate it, hate it. But I can't wait to see what, like, the writer and director comes up with next, because I feel like she's genuinely super talented, and I want to watch more of her movies. And I got a lot out of what she was going for here, except for the humor. And then, I slept on the movie, thought about it some more, did a few more notes, and I'm like, all right, hate is way too strong of a word. Like, I think that gut reaction, like when I shut off the TV, was way too much. I don't know if I'm going to revisit this movie in the near future, but it's definitely worth a watch. And there's definitely a lot of ground to cover. Like, there's a lot of meat on the bone. And I'm going to just echo what you both said. Like, it's a brilliant cast, and there are fantastic performances all around. Like, everyone is giving a solid effort here. Can we just take a minute and say what a year for Annabelle Wallis?
Yeah. It's so crazy because, you wrote a note, like, you can't even really recognize her, but that's because of the Malignant wig. That's what did that to her. Like, this is kind of more what she looks like. But yeah, I didn't even, because Malignant came out first. So, like, whenever I watched this, I literally didn't even recognize her. But what a year for her. I mean, Keira Knightley, Matthew Good, Sope Dirisu. I mean, we got a really stacked cast in this one.
Yeah. But to go from Malignant to this, like, two very different performances, but two, like, brilliant performances, like, gets what she needs to do in each role and nails it in both roles. Like, she's a highlight in both movies.
She made my top 10 twice. Not too many people have that honor, because Malignant was my number 1 that year.
And that's a solid choice for number 1. Malignant is brilliant. I would love me some more Malignant. Don't know if we'll ever see more of it, unfortunately.
I have a sequel pitch, so if somebody listens to me, I have a great sequel pitch for a Malignant 2.
James Wan, if you're out there, hear my friend Devon out.
Big fan of the Pendulum, James Wan.
If we can have Basket Case 2 and 3, we can have a Malignant franchise.
There should be. There's going to be a Thanksgiving, too.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that. I'm excited.
Hey, sure.
I love it. There are leftovers. They lied. They said there would be no leftovers. There are apparently leftovers. I'm excited. Look, I loved it. Nicole's shaking her head with disappointment.
We'll chalk it up for your Massachusetts bias for that one.
A lot of people like this movie. Come on, a lot of people like Thanksgiving. People are going to get mad. It's very high in my top 10 for the year. It's like very high in my top 10 Although I think something else is going to end up very high once I see it this coming week. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this movie. Writer-director Camille Griffin, she spoke about trying to get funding for one of her scripts for years, but being unable to do so. She had written a bunch of dramas about dysfunctional middle class in the UK based on her own experiences and upbringing, but found it hard to find a buyer. And at that stage in her career, she had made like 7 short films, but that was about it. And she'd also been in a number of film sets working the camera. So she actually, when she was making this movie, had already been behind the camera or in a number of film crews. So it wasn't a matter of first time director, hope she's not in over her head. No, she knew exactly what needed to get done. And was able to run a very tight schedule and get everything done on time, which is remarkable considering what we'll talk about in a minute. So her son Roman was cast as the lead child in Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit. And while on set, Griffin had the realization that she's I could actually turn some of my material into comedy. She figured if Waititi could do it for the Holocaust, nothing would be out of bounds at that point, which, again, Nicole, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah. Feelings about that. But I like her.
Espouse those feelings.
Well, I have very complex feelings about Jojo Rabbit, but I think that Roman is really a good actor. And so Camille, it was interesting. I was reading an interview with her and she talked about, growing up very posh. I think she grew up in Suffolk. And had a very privileged upbringing, but said that she always struggled because she's people that are of a certain class are making decisions, but I don't think they should. I kind of bristle with that. But she's I'm also part of that. So how do I reconcile? And so I like this idea of here is some material that I can put a comedic spin on. It feels, because everyone's talking about Saltburn and Emerald Fennell, this feels very much like Saltburn meets The Happening. And I like just her impulses there. And of course, she has a really talented, a couple of her kids, all 3 of her kids, I think, were cast in this. So
I didn't realize Roman was her kid until this rewatch. Whenever I was oh shit, and it's so cool to not only her kind of getting that realization from his project, and to put into this one, and it's an interesting creative synergy between your kin. That's kind of something you dream about, to kind of have this, and you see that brought out too, because she really leans on Roman quite heavy. She gives him a lot to do in this film. And this kid is phenomenal. I can't wait to see him in more things, because I think he is a super fantastic actor. And yeah, that's I would love to see her and Emerald Fennell sit down and have a conversation, because the way that they kind of approached those feelings in different ways is very fascinating. I would say this is The Happening meets The Invitation, because I was Will and Eden, or not Will, but David and Eden in that movie, they would have loved this dinner party. They would have had a blast here at the Silent Night dinner party.
If Camille Griffin and Emerald Fennell want to get together and make Fennell's erotic Jurassic Park movie come to fruition, I am here for it. I am all for that. I am all for that happening. You know what? Make it. Will this into the world. Let's make it happen. Yeah, it is interesting that she did have all 3 of her children cast here as the children of Nell and Simon. And most of it does fall on Roman's shoulders. Like, he is definitely the lead. The other two kids, like the twins, like, they don't really have a lot to do. They play a little bit of the comic relief, but they're mostly in the background. And, you know, you can see, I mean, Roman gets cast in a pretty big Oscar-winning movie. You know, he's got some chops. He is a pretty talented child actor. We'll talk about it when we talk about the movie. I bristle with some of the choices they make just from a storytelling perspective. Just some of the things, kind of like the out of the mouth of babes choices they have, but that might be a little nitpick. But we'll talk about that when we get to the film itself. Speaking to Film Inquiry, Griffin relayed a story, like how she came up with the idea for Silent Night, where her and her kids were watching War Horse, and they asked her, like, what would happen if there was a war, and she replied, well, it'd be pretty bad. There'd be a nuclear war, and we'd have to live in a bunker, and would just rot out, and was a horrible conversation to have. I said, we'll all end up in the forest shooting or eating each other. And then she laughed, or we just sort of lay down, take some medications, and go to sleep. So that was like a conversation I think she had while like giving her kids like baths, basically, after they asked. Was so pretty hardcore conversation to have with like your young children. So would love to be a fly in the wall for some of the dinner time conversations, or maybe the choice of like bedtime stories.
I can totally feel that story in some of the scenes in this as well, just because they're, you know, because of the circumstances, they're like letting the kids have these complicated conversations. And I'm always an advocate for like not talking down to kids. Like my parents were never that way with us. Like
same.
If you'd quote one of my dad's famous quotes, you know, is before he said something crazy, he'd be like, "Hey, you guys know me. I don't sugarcoat shit." And that was always, you know, what he'd say before we ended up having like a real serious dark conversation.
Well, I think it's... Oh, you first, Nicole.
I do think, though, that that's an interesting setup of how the story kind of came together. Because, you know, the whole first chunk of this movie is them sugarcoating or trying to ignore any sense of reality in a lot of ways. So I find that was probably, you know, her as a parent maybe struggling with, you know, on one level you do want to protect your kids and not talk about these topics, but at the same time, like, if your kids are going to be dying in a matter of hours, you probably should just be like, so here's what's up, and it sucks. So I do, again, I think that there's a lot of thoughtfulness that I think you're seeing just from the tip-top of how this movie came together.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because I think you see a contrast between, like, these real-life conversations, and she said they led to conversations with her and her husband about that privilege and class and the responsibility and this story developing, and then transposing that to the characters of like Nell and Simon, who aren't necessarily prepared to have those conversations with their kids. Like, you know, Art wants to force those conversations, and they're constantly steering him back to the party. Like, nope, we don't want to do this. You know, they'll like tiptoe around it, but like they don't want to entertain the conversations for too long, which is, we'll talk about that when we talk about the movie. Like, I am more on Devon's, your dad's side of like, don't sugarcoat shit. Like, I am definitely more of that parent, but God, that can be hard.
It comes into like some of the themes of autonomy that will come up in the movie discussion.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll dig into that. Her idea to set it at Christmas came because she liked the contrast. You know, she says Christmas is supposed to be this time of sentimentality and togetherness. So let's make the darkest possible story to contrast that. And I think it really works here. Like, unlike last week where I pitched this idea that like it's a little bit cynical to set Better Watch Out at Christmas because otherwise the movie's good, but ultimately maybe a little disposable, where setting it during the holiday season now, whenever you, like you said, need those SEO clicks or need that clickbait, every year there's going to be those like 10 holiday horror movies you should watch. Like there's a really good chance Better Watch Out makes that list. This, I think, the Christmas setting really, really works. It's a great contrast, and it's a smart move to set it here.
Yeah, it's like I could see this working also as a Thanksgiving movie, or even but I think New Year's Eve would have been too on the nose. So I think Christmas was kind of the perfect for the contrast of it.
Thanksgiving just it's not a thing in Britain.
Oh yeah, that is also true.
Yeah. So they always like when we call when we're off on Thanksgiving, we'll call my wife's family, and they're like, "Yeah, we're just working today. It's just Thursday." And I'm like, I made this giant meal. And they're like, of course you did, because you're like a big dude. I'm like, no, because it's Thanksgiving. So this script existed long before anyone had heard of COVID. The first draft, the cataclysmic event, was actually going to be a virus, but Griffin's agent advised, like, no one's going to believe that. So the toxic fumes were substituted as an idea, like climate change was a much more believable idea for a cataclysmic event than, say, a virus wiping out millions of people, which, whoops. As the film was shooting, Griffin says, like, news of the virus started to emerge, but lockdowns were not yet in effect. And she actually talked to cinema scholars, and she said of the shoot, this is a quote from her, anyways, the pandemic grew as we were filming, and we had a 3.5-week shoot. And by the end of the third week, people were frightened. We wrapped early, and then we were editing. And I think at the point where we locked the edit, there wasn't a vaccine. They were still hoping to find a vaccine, but it wasn't being administered. It wasn't out in the public. So there were lots of things. Had I known then what I know now, obviously, there might have been more delicate choices we would have made. But we were working in a bubble, not only a physical bubble, but an emotional bubble. We were all sitting in our homes going, what the hell's going on? So, she talks about it being like a really fraught time, like that race to get things done. Like, I think everybody knew everything was going to shut down, like February, by March, everybody knew, like, all right, things are going to be shutting down, and everybody was in a bit of a panic to get as much done as possible before that happened. And then once that occurred, we can talk about it, like, to me, I think the scariest thing about the lockdown, or genuinely maybe the most upsetting thing, was we didn't have any idea of when it was going to end. Like, if someone said, like, you're going to be in your homes for 6 months, this is when we think we're going to lift it, this is the end date, you can deal with that, because, like, you can circle a day in the calendar and say, this is how much time is left. Like, it's how I get through the school year. I literally say, this is the last day of school, and I can tell you right now, we're 57 days into the school year. I have 123 days left until summer break. I can tell you how many days there are 15 days until Christmas break, and I get a week off. And it's how I get through. It's like, it's what mentally lets me get through the year. Not, if I didn't know that, I would be a mess.
Yeah, that's very fascinating, because I like tracking the timelines of some of these movies that do kind of have, illusions or feelings that we were having due to COVID. And it's kind of crazy that this was so early in it, because I see, especially on rewatch, I see so many things that I was like, oh my goodness, like this, I really felt a lot of these certain things. So it's kind of fascinating to see the way that evolved, and like you had mentioned, like it's kind of how they did it in this, which is they did have a date in time that they knew that when the gas was going to be coming. So like but even still knowing, it still kind of had this other kind of fear for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what's interesting too is that even though there's some certainty about this is when it's supposed to happen, because obviously they're tracking it as it's spreading. there's still a lot of uncertainty about like, what will this actually look like? We have this understanding of what we're being told, but I think that there's still kind of this seed of, are we being lied to? Is there more information out there that we're not being told? And I think that's really where I think, Mike, what you were alluding to before from the mouth of babes, kind of comes in.
I'm actually here just like alluding to the idea of just making this thing, just like trying to get everybody locked in, just trying to get the film locked, making sure that all your parts are done so you can send everybody home safely, and then editing it and going like, do we need pickup shots? Do I have to bring anybody back? Can we get into this lead? I think I believe I read they went back for like a week and actually filmed a little bit more with a tight bubble at some point in 2020 to just like finish the picture, and then got some pickup shots as well. So like and we've seen, there were like a lot of great indie films that came out in the wake of the pandemic that were like literally 5-person crews where you have like 1 or 2 performers, totally like tiny pandemic movies. I'm thinking like Benson and Moorhead doing like Digging in the Dirt was one of them.
Something in the Dirt.
Something in the Dirt, you're right, thank you. There's like a lot of like great little pandemic titles that have come out, like The Harbinger by oh god, I interviewed him and love him dearly, and now I'm drawing a blank on his name because I always do that. But The Harbinger, which is one of my favorite movies of last year, is another like great pandemic title. So people were able to create and do incredible things, but God love you, like what a crazy time to do it.
Yeah, you had mentioned 2021 being like kind of a lost year for films, and honestly, like that was like I had so many like of my favorites come out in that time because it was such an interesting time that like, yes, there were obviously like constraints, but then I feel like there was also, since these movies weren't going to theaters and stuff like that, there was also maybe a little bit more freedom creatively, at least with telling some of these stories as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The shackles are off a little bit. You can do whatever. I mean, we saw that with Host, right? I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Host, and I know I'm in the minority there, but they're like, yeah, we can just do a 60-minute movie. That's as long as the story needs to be. So we'll just make it 61 minutes because that's all we need. And people loved it.
Yeah, I think that movie like kind of was, even though, because I'm kind of the same way, I thought it was like, it was fun for what it was. But I think it gave people hope that it's like, oh no, like we can still make movies, we can still make art, and we can still have these things even in this time,
I can tell you who loves Host. Teen girls. Because that was like my daughter's birthday party movie. They watch it in the basement, and we were like sitting right above them in the living room. And I could time like where they were in the movie based on like when the screams were coming. So we're like, all right, there's 40 minutes left. There's 35 minutes left. So it was pretty much like that. Again, we'll talk really briefly about this cast because it is like pretty much stacked from top to bottom. At the lead, there's Keira Knightley, obviously best known for the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. She has gone on to not only do that, but, excuse me for 1 second here. Now, she does like a lot of period pieces like Pride and Prejudice. She's done Atonement, The Imitation Game, which she did with Simon Good. But again, best known as Elizabeth Swann from the Pirates of the Caribbean series. And she received the script when she was about 7 months pregnant, and read it and thought it was one of the funniest scripts that she had ever received. And then after she gave birth, she read it again when her child was about 5 months old, and then had a completely like different reaction, finding the script like really chilling and really dark and really scary, which, man, what a vibe check. Like only about a 6 or 7 month swing there, and she's like, this is horrifying.
Yeah, that there have been other, I think, films where, an actor has had a kid or gone through like a major life experience after, first getting the script or hearing about a film, and then all of a sudden they're like, wow, this material is completely different now in a certain perspective. And I think you do see that, I think, in her performance. I really like her. I know that she's known for doing her period pieces, but she's also really great in Never Let Me Go, which is kind of an indie with Carey Mulligan, Andrew Garfield, and it's really, really kind of dark and sad. She was in Cronenberg's Dangerous Method. So I like her, and I think, this cast is absolute bangers.
Stacked.
Yes.
You have Matthew Good playing opposite her as her husband Simon. He had appeared with her in The Imitation Game. Before that, he had done Watchmen, where he plays Ozymandias. He appeared in Stoker. And he was also the lead in the show, I think it's on AMC and Shudder, The Discovery of Witches. So he's playing the dad here. This is one of the first major roles for Lily Rose Depp, daughter of Johnny Depp. So, probably best known for The Idol at this point, which I think more people kind of talked about on social media than actually ever watched. I know I've never watched that show. Like, I'm definitely aged out of that particular television show. Prior to this, really, aside from some random one-shots, she had done, 2 Kevin Smith movies. She was, a clerk in the movie Tusks, and then she had done another Kevin Smith movie, Yoga Hosers.
They're connected. It's the same.
Yeah,
playing the
same character, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have not seen Yoga Hosers. I
don't bother.
Kind of refuse to believe it actually exists.
Don't watch it. It's tough. But she's best friends with Kevin Smith's daughter, Harley Quinn Smith. Yeah.
Good for her. Good for them both. I love Kevin Smith. It'll be hard for me to ever say a bad word about him. I just think the worst thing that ever happened to him is he said, I have 2 million followers on Twitter. What if I just make movies for them? That maybe was the worst decision in terms of filmmaking that he ever made. He just kind of stopped challenging himself. But whatever, you know what? We still have Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy and Dogma and all those fun movies that I really like. And some would say they don't like those either, so that's another story. Soap Dirisu co-stars as James. He's done some great work, co-lead of the show Gangs of London, and then he did His House for Netflix, which is awesome.
You want to talk about a gut punch of a movie? That movie that's a heavy movie, and I love. I really hope that I'll be able to pull a clip from this movie here in the future, because they've been trying to figure out who's going to be the next James Bond. A lot of people on Twitter have thrown around Dirisu's name. And then there's a line in the movie where Annabelle Walsh's character calls him James Bond. And I was like, so I'm really hoping he actually does get cast, just so I can pull the clip from this film of her calling him James Bond.
Yeah. They even, you're right. They reference that in the movie. You look like James Bond, and they all look at her funny, but he kind of does.
He would be a great James Bond, because he's got the action chops for sure.
Because I feel like Idris Elba, the time has maybe passed. He might have aged out of it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'd still go watch it. I'm not a big James Bond guy, so what do I know? I probably wouldn't go see it, only because I've watched 3 James Bond movies my whole life. So who am I kidding? Although I don't know, maybe I'd watch the first one. Rufus Jones, who plays Tony, the kind of sad sack husband of, I want to say Sadie, and I'm completely wrong. because I always get names wrong. It's not good. Not good when you talk to people for a living and you forget names all the time. Husband of Sandra, Annabelle Walls' Sandra. So Rufus Jones is like the British version of the American that guy. He has one of those faces when you see him, you're like, I've seen him in things before. And that's because, like, seriously, in the past 5 years, the guy has played, like, 500 different roles. And if you have a subscription to BritBox, which is like a British television streaming service, you've probably seen him in about 40 different things. So he's just, I work. You know, he just takes every single role that comes to him, which good for him. He's pretty good here. You know, not much of a role, kind of maybe one of the more thankless ones, but what can you do? But again, top to bottom, like, awesome cast.
Yeah, really great chemistry. Like, but whether it be the, you know, interrelationships of, like, those that are married, or, like, also, like, because they're all college friends, you definitely feel that. Like, so I think that even though, you know, not all of them have, you know, some of them have more spotlight moments than others, they still they congeal very nicely. Yeah.
So the last note I'll make is the song that's featured. And the opening credits, like the opening montage, and then kind of like the closing montage as everybody is taking the pill. And Nicole is like, she's actually turning red. Like, she's angry right now. Like, she's so mad. Michael Bublé's The Christmas Sweater Song, which is like this really jaunty little Christmas tune. Kind of one of the rare, and I don't think it's caught on, because I don't hear this song played across like Christmas playlists or Christmas stations. Like, not like a Mariah Carey All I Want Is Christmas banger.
Well, because Bublé has put out like multiple Christmas albums because nobody cares to listen to his regular music. So he's like, oh, well, I'll get them for Christmas, you know. So, I mean, it was fitting, and it was a fun little way to introduce the characters at the beginning, you know. Okay. I'll say that.
This is how you know it's a horror movie, is that it starts out with Bublé. I hate this song. I hate Bublé as much as I hate the song. But I think the song is kind of perfect because it does have a slightly like more ominous kind of opening to it. So I do appreciate the vibe, and I do think that, you know, the whole scene of them in the car driving up, I think is really cute when she's telling her girlfriend, I really like this song, and the girlfriend is very much like me, like, no, shut the fuck up. Like, please just shut it off.
So a couple things about it. Was not written for this movie, but it was released around the same time. I'm actually surprised they got there. I'm sure it's not cheap to get the music rights for a song like this, especially, I mean, like, whatever we think about the guy, like, he's a pretty big recording artist, so I'm sure, like, it's probably not cheap to get the rights. And this is what he had to say. My God, like, this is AI generated quote right here. And this is the sweet, meaningful story that the song depicts has touched the hearts of his fans across the world. While talking to CNN, the singer revealed, hanging out with my family and all our relatives and friends. For me, there's nothing better than that. He also added, to me, the holidays are about bringing people together and being with family. It's no secret, it's my favorite time of the year. The holidays are a time to step back and cherish your loved ones. He further said he used to sing and dance to Christmas songs like Feliz Navidad and Santa Claus is Coming to Town and more with his family during Christmas. And to me, it is like,
I am a human. I love Christmas. I swear I'm a human.
Like, can you picture Frank Sinatra saying something like, Frank Sinatra would beat the shit out of like a reporter that asked him something like that, and then he's like, I gotta go bang Ava Gardner. Get out of here with this. Just stop. You know? Miss you, Frank.
He's so...
Oh, it's the most PR generated. So He doesn't talk about the movie being... There's no word whatsoever about like, oh yeah, by the way, this song is going to be in a new horror movie where everybody commits mass suicide at the end and then the world ends. Like, no word about that. But he talks like the music video is apparently about the Christmas sweater, trying to convince a woman to wear it, and then someone wears a matching sweater at a party and they go home together. So the message is like, wear an ugly Christmas sweater to a party and you'll get laid. So, you know,
continuing the trend of slightly creepy Christmas songs.
Yeah, lovely. So that's the background. And let's talk about this movie now. We did a little bit, but let's kind of dig in. And I'll ask you both, because I've kind of chatted here a lot. What do you both make of like the opening montage that sets up this movie? You know, you have the jaunty tune. Whatever you think of the tune, it is jaunty. It is, you know, I think what you would typically see in a happy, upbeat, kind of like light comedy. How do these first, like, say, 5 to 10 minutes kind of like set up like this movie on a tee for what it's about to deliver?
It does an interesting thing of, because yeah, it is very merry. It is very kind of kind of supposed to have this like warmth feeling to it. But then you can still see with some of the actors, like you can like see like a layer of like unsureness to them, and you know, and it can go to, you know, the way that people kind of feel about holidays in general. Like, oh, like, what if I have something going on in my life, but hey, I got to make this appearance at the family thing, so I got to pretend like I'm, you know, doing all good, you know, and everything. So it's like it kind of has that layer to it, but then on the rewatch is whenever you can kind of, you know, see some of the nods as to the things that are going to happen. And again, like the language that they use of like, oh yeah, I had to go, you know, wrestle this away from somebody at the grocery store. You know, people always say that, but then they actually mean it in this one when we, you know, kind of know the premise of this. So like, it's a lot more interesting on the rewatch, kind of looking at like the little details and the way that the characters are, you know, you know, the way that they're feeling as they're approaching this party.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the opening montage is so important because you really need to establish some personality bits of these characters, because we want to be able to, I mean, if you go in kind of knowing what the film is and how it's going to play out, you kind of want to get to know these folks so you understand like what kind of journey they're going to be going on as they're in this house, kind of dealing with what's happening outside. Mm-hmm. One thing, and this is probably nothing and just me being ridiculous, but one thing I did notice in my most recent rewatch of this was that Art cuts himself, bleeds on the carrot, and he's the only one that is bleeding at the end. Not counting the person who was stabbed, but bleeding from the illness. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, kind of like marking him a bit from the beginning.
Yeah. Setting him aside as someone a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like what you said there too, Devon, about like this could be either thing. Like on first watch, you know, you do have these persons, like you have Lily Rose Depp's character of Sophie, who is new. Like she doesn't know these people. Like she's just showing up for the first time and kind of like going to their house. And then you have Alex, who is like the girlfriend of Bella, who is just kind of tolerating these people in a way. Like she's not around her own mom, and she's just like in some ways kind of dragged along for it. And like, all right, I'm spending Christmas not necessarily with strangers, but not necessarily with people that I would choose to spend Christmas with outside of like my girlfriend. And they're like, what madcap family shenanigans are gonna ensue? And then you have got Kitty, who's kind of like the Veruca Salt, like very, very big, like Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka vibes we're getting from her, you know, kind of spoiled, daddy's little girl, I want it now vibes from her. And it does kind of give off like we're going to have like a merry, funny, madcap comedy until it's no longer that. Like it's not really hinted at in these opening 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, it's like, and you still see them doing like, you know, the preparations that you normally would for a holiday gathering, but then like with like just like little slight differences, like whenever Nell is like kind of going around picking up, she just like throws the like bed sheets in the trunk because it's like, oh well, I don't really need to make the bed today, you know, for what's gonna happen later, you know. So like you're kind of seeing some of those little details. You're seeing Matthew Good chucking the chickens over the fence. And with you know, and the way that they talk about Kitty is very funny because like, you know, we all have that family member that honestly nobody really likes, but hey, we love them because they're family. But then just because of the circumstance, they're able to talk about it even more openly. They're just like, oh yeah, Kitty fucking sucks. Like, is she coming? Oh, we could have just left her at home. And then they're like, oh well, we couldn't just leave her at home. And then they're like, well, couldn't you? If you really wanted to put her down early, because that was a line. They were like, oh well, were we supposed to just put her down, you know, and leave her? And it's like, oh, now I know what you guys were talking about. Like they're literally just openly talking about, oh, we hope that Kitty's the first one to go.
Yeah, I might even be that family member to some of my relatives, to be quite honest. So, here's a general question I have. So we get this setting, and it's this gorgeous estate, like beautiful, posh home. Everyone is dressed like they're in tuxedos and luxurious outfits. It is like an obscenely wealthy estate, huge manor, like these lovely grounds, not a person that's around them. How do we... I feel like as an American audience, like we are way cooler with spending time with like obscenely wealthy British people than we are with like an American wealthy family. And maybe I'm completely wrong. Like maybe I'm stating my own biases here, but there seems to be like, all right, wealthy British people, like totally cool. Something seems totally, we're either like your Ebenezer Scrooge, or like Scrooge McDuck, like you have all the money in the world, or you're Tiny Tim and Oliver Twist, like you have no money and you're just like shoveling gruel down your throat. Like there's no in between. And we will watch like Downton Abbey and The Crown, and we'll like consume that like there's no tomorrow and have no problem with it. Why are we cooler with watching like rich British people, I guess, is what I'm fumbling around with here.
I think it's because we can pretend it doesn't have that direct impact on us.
Okay.
That system doesn't have that direct impact on us. I think what is cool about this movie is that they talk about it. They talk about like, well, is the queen in her bunker? Is she eating dog food? Which I love how that keeps coming back. And I love the moment during the dinner where Matthew Good has to tell Keira Knightley, like, no, the dog food is actually because she has dog. She's not eating the dog food. She's like, oh, right. Yeah, and I think it's also very interesting because we find out that this is a family home, that it's not Keira and Matthew Good's home, that it's her parents. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that we're fine with it because we're away from that. We broke away from that. We made a point to break away from that system, so we don't have to involve ourselves in it. But that's kind of a fallacy in and of itself.
Yeah, I think Nicole hit it really on the head. Yeah, we're just not as connected to it. We don't understand their kind of wealth and class system as much as we understand our own. And I think this one is interesting. Like, this is, kind of a more fair portrayal of like, because I wouldn't consider this like an Eat the Rich movie, because it's not, because this is kind of like everybody in the world, but but this kind of puts it in a context, though, that it's like, as much as we do love to see rich people suffer from time to time, hey, not every rich person in the world is evil. They're also still human beings themselves, and they're also going to also die themselves as well. So, I think the inevitableness of this situation, we don't need to see like the extra of them being cut down to size, like, oh, let me take you down a few notches. It's like they're already going to be taken down a few notches in a few hours, so it's like we don't really need to have the in this film like some sort of eat the rich commentary for this.
Well, I still think that the eat the rich commentary pokes through, but in a very subtle way. Like the conversation that Art and his dad have when it's revealed that not everyone has received the exit pill. And, it's really uncomfortable. And Art is like, I want to, be honest with me. Are there people who haven't been given this pill, and I want to know why? And we learn that folks that are experiencing homelessness, illegal immigrants, and probably other populations aren't getting access to this exit pill. And the whole idea of this exit pill is that it's supposed to make everything easier, like you just die painlessly. Although I think we learned that that's not even necessarily true. So I think that you're exactly right, Devon. I think it doesn't have to be. This isn't. It's not a film about that, so it doesn't have to make it kind of the centerpiece. Yeah. But I like that it's still threaded through very delicately.
Yeah, I do like the way Art and Simon's conversation touches on that, because it speaks to like, what do we owe our population? And in a case like this, like there should be some dignity in death. And the sad thing here is like I think Simon says to his son, well, technically these people don't exist, which is a really chilling thing to say to your son. Like, well, these persons don't exist. And his son, Art, says like, well, of course they do. Like, what a ridiculous thought. It's like, well, according to the government, they don't exist. And that's a really scary, sad, and very true thing. Like, it's probably the most honest thing that Simon says, or one of the most honest things that Simon says to his kid the whole movie. He's right. Like, according to the government, like, you're right, homeless persons don't exist. The unhoused don't exist. The persons that are undocumented in the country don't exist to them. And it's silly to not give them the pill because A, those things probably cost pennies to create, and B, who cares? You don't need money anyway at this point. Like, money no longer has any. My first thought was like, these things only cost pennies to create, and then I'm like, but money doesn't even have meaning anymore. And then the thought was like, it's all about making someone suffer in the end, and that there is like, in the end, there's some bureaucrat taking his pill, washing it down with like a $100 swig of like a Macallan 12, and thinking, well, at least I got to make somebody suffer is one of my last acts. And that's what it comes down to, is needless. The cruelty is the point. And I think that's what Griffin is saying here, is that there is always going to be a certain class of persons. And I don't mean class as in class structure, but like a certain type of person. And they're usually in power because they want to achieve power that is going to make others want to suffer. That's the whole point of their existence.
Yeah, and I feel that that's in the interview that I was reading with the director. I think that that's what she was really zeroing in on with some of the ideas that she wanted to expound on, based on her upbringing of why are people in my situation, my standing in life, able to make some of these choices about what matters, who matters, in society, and how you grapple with that. And again, like what do you do when that's a reality? How do you?
Yeah. It's fascinating, the point that you made, that it's like, yeah, like, why wouldn't everybody get this? If the world's ending, money is not going to be a thing anymore. We're not, like, there's no cost for supplies, at this point. So I find that fascinating because during, whenever the vaccine was released, I was working at Dodger Stadium. I was there at the vaccination sites. And the hardest part of that was, like, I was put in this position because if you guys remember when it came out, there were the tiers on, like, who gets it at certain points. So it was such a, like, it was an impossibly hard thing for me to have to tell people, like, because people would show up even if they weren't in the tier and be like, well, I'm here already, why don't you just give it to me? And it was because, like, we had a limited supply for, like, that day. They had very tight expiration dates, things like that, and they couldn't also they couldn't make extras. Like, it was like, we make it for the day for this amount of people, and that's the reason that we did. So, like, we would literally have to, like, have people that waited 3 hours in line thinking that they were going to slip through and, like, get it, and then we're like, no, I'm sorry, like, you got to go because the other people. And, like, so, like, the way that they made those tiers out of, who should get it was, like, elderly was the top, and then it was, like, first responders, and then it, like, kind of went by age groups and things like that. And it was, like, kind of wondering, like, how did they come up with this tier system to designate who it's more important to get this now, when everybody wants everyone to have it, but we had to have some sort of, like, structure to it. Which was, it was fucking tough. Like, I had people screaming in my face, because they were, super upset that they couldn't, get it at the time that they wanted to. So, very fascinating to see that in this as well.
Yeah. Well, and you get into the conversation that Sophie has, which I really love, that she, despite being the new person, and obviously I think a little bit nervous about being there, she doesn't hold back, because Kitty makes the comment, they're talking about the queen, and, it's a complicated thing because I kind of see where Kitty is coming from with the queen, especially being like
112.
Like,
bones are made of dust.
Yeah, like, she's fine. Like, do we really have to worry about her? But Sophie, and I do this all the time, I'm that person that will be like, okay, well, first off, fuck you and your ageism. Even though you're a child, fuck you and your ageism. And let me lay down some hard truths about why are we making these delineations about what populations matter. And I mean, I love that this is, again, it's getting into not just kind of the class piece, but I think especially, our own experiences with the vaccines, and even beyond that, just the COVID experience overall, and how certain populations, had a much rougher go because of how people, were like, oh, they don't really matter. If they get sick, they get sick. They're sick anyway. So, I don't know. I just really appreciate that the film has these conversations, but I think then you have these characters that are like, all right, let's move on. No more. Yeah. Shut up. Let it go.
Let's talk more about that dinner conversation, because I noted that here, because I think there's a lot going on in that conversation, and I think it's fascinating. I get what Sophie is arguing for there, and I don't think the conversation that Wallace's character is going for, I don't think Sandra is necessarily trying to be cruel or ageist. I think she's trying to offer like a kind of false comfort to the kids. And I think that is something we often, like, when our parents are older and they're sick.
Yeah.
It's something that we would say, like, something that a conversation I'm going to have with my daughter at some point. And it's a conversation that, like, my wife had with her mother when her father was very ill and was in hospice. Was like, well, Dad lived like a very full life. He had a very long life. He was happy. He raised a wonderful family. Like, he lived a life. Like, and this is what we all come to in the end. And it wasn't like, well, he deserves to die or there's nothing more. It's like, no, there's nothing more that could be done for him, but we can still celebrate, like, the life that he had. And I think what Sandra's trying to offer there is less about, well, these people don't deserve medication or a chance to live. It's more like there's nothing that can be done. We can celebrate the fact that they had an opportunity to live like a full life. Does that, I don't know if that makes sense. I get what you're saying, where like in other circumstances, if you're like, hey, there's this medicine that can like, it can exempt you from, you know,
pain.
You won't die from this thing. You won't die. If we give you this medicine, you will not die from this mist, but we're not going to give it to you because you're above 75 years old and you've had your run, Grandpa, you're all done. That would be more to me like ageism.
Yeah, but we're still talking about pain.
Mm-hmm. Ah.
And, like, if we're all going to die, but these people get a more comfortable exit, right? Like, that's the point. They get to be in their posh house with people that they love.
Right.
And they just get to take a pill, lay down, and go out peacefully.
What am I missing? Because who was she saying wasn't going to get? Because they weren't talking about the homeless there at that part of the dinner. Like, who was she saying? I think she was just saying it's okay that, like, like, the queen is going to die because she's lived a very long life. Like, she wasn't saying she deserved to die painfully.
Yeah, but I think they're also talking about, because there's, and maybe I'm misremembering bits and pieces in a certain order, but I think we also get there's also art is kind of interjecting into the conversation because he's seeing the headlines on the packages, because which I think is brilliantly morbid. Mm-hmm. They've wrapped up the gifts in these newspapers all about like this impending doom. And so he's looking at it and asking questions. And I think that that's fueling a lot of the conversation at the table. And so I think there's kind of two different conversations happening. One is about, you know, to what you're saying, you know, well, someone that's older and is passing away, they've lived a life, and that's worth celebrating. Like, they've had different experiences, and just as we would if they were to pass naturally, we recognize and celebrate that they had a long life.
Yeah.
But I think that there's also some interjection about, well, does she have the pill? Does she have the exit pill? And I think that there's some back and forth there, which then shifts the conversation to someone saying, and I think it's actually Kitty who, in her asshole mode, says, well, does it even matter?
Kitty's the worst. If we could agree on one thing.
And so that's, I think, where I think that's what, like, spurs Sophie to say, like, well, fuck you. Like, no, just because someone is old doesn't mean that they deserve to wither in pain.
Yeah, it like kind of opened the floodgates, and it did it in a way because, you know, Sandra is trying to, you know, they, like, whenever they ask about the queen, then they like kind of trying to make it into a joke a little bit, but then it's also they pretty much point out, like, well, why are we even talking about the queen? Because we already know that she's going to be fine and comfortable. Why don't we talk about the people that aren't? You know, like, that's kind of where the conversation shifts, because like we don't need to talk about the queen and her things, like, what, you know, and, you know, Sandra's trying to like make jokes about it and things like that to like try and keep it light, but her trying to cover, you know, up the conversations that need to be had is what, you know, makes them kind of boil over to the surface, and then, you know, the you know, kind of goes to this more tension filled conversation, and I think this is the point in the film though where they do start letting the kids voice their opinions and be like, okay, like we're kind of in a spot where it's unavoidable, so like let's go ahead and let the kids have their say, you know, and start saying stuff. But then once the kids start making points, that's when Simon's like, okay, well, let's not talk about this anymore, you know, because they are, you know, making points that, you know, that the parents kind of refuse to acknowledge, and like, or that they know is there, but they don't want to talk about like the actual points that they have, you know. So like that's kind of how the tension like kind of gets upped in this sequence.
Devon, how do you feel about Simon's role in all this? Because you can watch his discomfort growing throughout this scene where he's doing his best. Like part of it is he wants to protect the children from this conversation. I feel like that's a cover. He's not ready to have these conversations. Like he's using the kids almost as a cover for himself, like his own fear. He's very scared. He admits at the end, like, I'm terrified, which is totally understandable. Like, hey, not going to blame him, but he's not ready to have these conversations, and he's telling Sophie, like, I need you to back off, like, and you are a guest in our home, stop doing this. And Sophie is gonna press forward anyway. So I hear what you're saying. I'm still like, and I see that line that you just drew in the sand, allow me to just like step over that line.
I mean, yeah, let me go ahead and take this moment to say, so every year I give an award out. I call it the Horror Good Boy of the Year, because most men in horror movies suck. But you know what? There are ones that are good ones. And Simon was my good boy of 2021 because he is flawed. And I will say this dinner scene is kind of the part where you kind of see some of the, you know, the flawedness of his character, but he is just trying so hard. Like, that's the thing. Like, they even like they allow the kids to, like, you know, cuss and things like that, and like, and in certain circumstances, you know, if this was the case, I know certain families would just be like, no rules at all, like, do whatever you want. But even in this circumstance, he is still trying to be a good dad. He is still trying to, you know, protect his kids, and he's trying to do these things. And I just see that throughout the whole film. Like, he really is just like trying so hard to, like, you know, keep a balance between, like, yes, we do need to have this kind of stuff, and like, yes, we need to have this. I think in any other instance, yeah, Sophie would kind of be overstepping their bounds. But considering the circumstances, one, she chose to spend this apocalypse with you guys. So like, at this point, she's not even just a guest anymore. She should be considered family because she is there with you guys. And it would also be rude to like also like not let her be able to say her piece and like kind of have to just wrestle with these thoughts on her own, you know. Like, I think, you know, that's kind of certain things that kind of keep coming up is like, you know, the again, like the autonomy and choices, like, oh, like, you know, well, she's dealing with it in this way, like, and we need to be fair to her, like, because I love the recurring thing that Nell keeps saying throughout the movie, that this is all about truth and love. It's all about truth and love and togetherness. And it's like, well, if it's actually about truth, then like we would be having these conversations throughout the night. The only thing that I would say is Simon could have been like, hey, let's not do this at dinner so that way we can enjoy the meal. But like, if he would have said, hey guys, we're going to have dinner, and then afterwards we're going to have like a just sit around discussion and we can air these things out. So like, that's the kind of part that I can see that like he did really just want to have this like one nice meal, and then it kind of goes to that point. But like, so he could have made just more of a distinction that way.
What do you think? I like what you're saying there, and that does make a lot of sense about Sophie at this point. I mean, this is their last Christmas. Like, she should be considered maybe part of the brood and part of the family and not really a stranger at this point. Although it's still pretty hard sometimes to take somebody that is like very new in. And a lot of it is just Simon's own discomfort, and Simon's got to learn to maybe sit with it a little bit. And I think maybe one of the things I struggle with this movie, like one of the reasons why I take it down a peg, is like and it's funny to say a movie about the end of human civilization as we know it, the stakes don't feel large enough. But I think like the big issue I have with it is like the stakes within this family often don't feel large enough. Like we move from the dinner scene to like after they give out the presents, you kind of do have that conversation where Sandra gets a little bit tipsy and she is sitting next to her husband Tony and looks at James and is like, why didn't you ever fuck me? And that is like the biggest stakes that there are at that point. And it's resolved pretty quickly with no hard feelings. Like I feel like a little bit better version of this movie, you have this family that like there's this real tension that's never been resolved, and this is the last night they're going to have to resolve it before they go to their maker. And there's some real issues that they've never gotten into. Here everybody seems to really like one another, and I think the issue I have is, why am I spending time with this particular family on the last night on Earth? And you covered Hitchcock recently on Spectre Cinema Club. Like you did a deep dive into Hitchcock, right? So I think about the opening of Psycho. And I think about Hitchcock's camera work, where you have like a long shot of the hotel and that camera starts moving towards like an open window. And it could have moved into any of those windows and settled on any number of stories. And it just happened upon Marion Crane's hotel room, and it decides to tell that story because it was the most interesting one. Why is the camera settling on this particular family story? Because they're not that particularly interesting of a family to me at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe it's to kind of have that, that ability to, paste anybody's kind of feelings onto this family, kind of in that way. Because, I think maybe it would have, it was trying to also have these people like confront stuff, because I think if we were kind of, focusing on like more of a middle class family or even like lower class family, there's going to be kind of different issues. Yeah. And I think just due to the fact that this movie is an apocalypse end of the world movie, I don't think the stakes are, higher in any degree, because the stakes are all the same for everybody, so it's like when all the stakes are the same, is there any stakes at all, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not too terribly interesting. Yeah, because I if I have one quibble, because I do love that open conversation scene, just in the because I think it's well performed. Like the look on Tony's faces, Sandra, and Nell and Simon just cracking up as like these like things about who fucked Tony on their break and like not fucking James. Like it's a very well performed scene, but at the same time, I definitely would have liked there to been like more like secrets that come up, or like more things that kind of have a little bit more moral weight to them. But then I guess it's also at the end of the day, hey, we're all gonna die here, so like, do we really need to drudge up the like real serious stuff that we talk about? Like, these are just like kind of the fun things that like have been on our mind, like that do matter, but also aren't as dire.
I think that it also is speaking to what is important to these people. They're a little self-centered. And so when you're facing the end of your life and you want to, have these conversations, you're going to want to have conversations about the things that matter to you. And what matters to her is, James, why didn't you fuck me? So I think it's appropriate. I think also outside of Sophie, they talk a little bit about everyone that's there taking this oath to take the exit pill. But I would perhaps make a wager that there is a little bit more to the oath as well. To say, like, we don't want there to be lots of drama. We don't, because to what Devon said earlier is Nell always comes back to truth and love. And so I think that they're playing kind of both ends. They want to be able to have difficult conversations, knowing that they're going to naturally occur, but they also want to gloss over any real issues and just make it seem like this is any other, slightly uncomfortable group gathering.
Well, speaking on that and speaking on like truth, I think the film doesn't necessarily tackle it, but I think just by the nature of its setting, just by the fact that it's like set on this estate, like it's the mother's home, but it's so isolated from everybody else that is like privilege in and of itself. Like this group of persons, like they don't have to face the end of the world with anybody else. And Devon, you hit on this earlier when you talked about like, hey, I was at the shop and I had to wrestle someone for that last ham. Like, and that's kind of a humorous line, but you can imagine that like elsewhere in the country, like if you're in a city or if you're in a suburb or really anywhere else, like it's probably a lot of chaos in the streets. Like it's probably a lot of panic. There's probably a lot of unrest, and there's probably a lot of bad actors that are like, hey, it's the last night on Earth. I can do whatever I want. There's like no repercussions. So there's probably a lot of fear as well. They get to isolate themselves from all of that, and there is a certain amount of privilege that comes with that. And the film itself isn't necessarily tackling that, and it's really a budget necessity. It's like we don't have the money to set it in this huge setting, but it kind of like addresses it by not addressing it.
Yeah, there's kind of like some slight allusions to previous things, like Nell talking about going to a store and couldn't get regular sparkling water because it was all out, or these different things, and which is also a crazy allusion to real life when everybody was nabbing up all the toilet paper during lockdown. And then there's also like the funny line where it's like they forgot like the sticky toffee pudding and need it, and Tony's like kind of worried to go back out. He's like, oh wait, I don't want to go do that. And then like, and what do I do? And she's like, oh, take a mallet and just go rob the place. It was kind of like a funny line, but yeah, because I'm curious, Mike, because I mean we did a lot of the Purge movies together, and since you're not a big fan of this one, if there was a version of this movie where more of these like darker secrets and stuff kind of do come out, and then it kind of descends into a little bit more chaos, and like what if like they all like end up killing each other in the house and nobody takes the pill? Would that be more your type of movie for this, and like kind of seeing more of the the stuff in the streets as well?
Honestly, I don't think I need that for this movie. I don't think I need to see I think it's a really, because the acting is so strong, I think it's like a really well done, contained bottle movie. I think and maybe we'll have this conversation now, because I think where it's pitched as like a horror comedy, a lot of the comedy to me, it fails to be funny in way too many instances. Like it just, after that opening montage and after maybe like some of the dinner scene, just none of the humor lands. Like some of the jokes they have, like, oh, Greta skipped school for this. Like, oh, that's so on the nose. Or the conversation where it's like, oh, we should have voted Green Party. Fucking conservatives. Like, it's so on the nose that it's like, man, that's not really... It just doesn't land. The example I have is at the end of the movie, Simon is tasked with getting his two twin boys a full can of soda. Because he's promised them, when you take the pill, you're going to be able to, like, have a can of fizzy drink and... with a cold can of soda, and it's like done to exaggerated effect. At first, like, it's only one can of soda to share, and you promise us a whole can, and then it's like it's warm, and then they spilled part of it, so now you have to get one to top it off and make sure it's even. And like Simon, and it's well acted and it's well done, and Simon has, like, to comic effect, or what should be comic effect, increasingly exaggerated reactions to all of this, but the humor doesn't land. It doesn't play as funny to me. you said this earlier when like Simon is like your good boy horror guy of the year. It plays to me as like this is Simon's last act as a father. He is going to... The last thing he's going to ever get to do as a dad is get his boys a can of soda, and God damn it, he's going to make it perfect. And he's flustered, and he's scared, and he's trying to choke down his own fear, and his other son doesn't know what's going on with him, but by God, he can get his kids a can of soda. So it doesn't really play as funny to me. It plays as a dad trying to do right by his boys one last time, because that will be their last memory of him. What is a little bit funny is when they see Art and he's like bleeding out, and he and Nell are like, fuck the kids, and they grab their soda and choke down their pills and then give them back their Coke. That's funny. Like, that's the one thing that made me laugh at the end of this movie. But the rest of it, like, there's not enough humor in this comedy.
Yeah, that the soda can scene is honestly one of my favorite scenes of the movie. Like,
okay.
I think it's a nice distillation of the blending of it. Like you know, and it's trying to, and it's a tough point of the movie to be trying to go for this dark comedy, you know, but I think just the simplicity of it does work. And like you said, like, this is him still trying to be a good dad in the last 10 minutes of, you know, his family's life. And like, yeah, like Matthew Good's reactions, like when he like, because he'll like take a pause in the hallway before he comes in back into the room with the sodas, and then like when he goes out and he like does like his like little like flailing thing. And then there's like also another shot where he's just like in the pantry, like on the floor, just like kind of sitting there for a minute. But I think it's a nice distillation of the blending of it, of trying to still inject humor into this really thing. Like, I mean, this movie doesn't go for like big laughs, but like I giggle throughout the entire throughout a lot of scenes in this. Like, I'm not like yeah, I think calling it a black comedy is tough. It's kind of more of a horror drama with some sprinkles of humor in it. Like, I wouldn't pitch this to somebody as a horror comedy, like, because that's like Tucker and Dale, you know, that's a horror comedy, you know, versus like but it works for me personally.
But I think the issue is they do pitch it as a comedy. Like, they come out and pitch this like this is a comedy, and I'm like, is it? Are you sure? Like, I do the you should be leaving. Are you sure about that? You know, like, that's how I feel. Like, comedy should be fun. And I just feel like there's not enough of that there. And, hey, so much of it works, just like that part is lacking to me.
What about your sense of humor, Nicole? Does this one make you laugh or giggle?
Yeah, I think it's very funny. And I think it's funny because it is kind of disturbing. You know, there's a dead kid, we imagine, being cradled by the mom, and his two brothers are more worried about a full can of soda. They don't know, I think, the gravity of the situation because they've hid him by keeping kind of his face obscured to Nell's chest. But you know, I think everyone knows that he's been exposed. And the kids are like, oh, but our soda.
That's really a great reveal, by the way.
Yeah. It's horrible. But I do find that funny because, again, it's just about like what matters to people when they're dying, when it's the end. What is their concern? What is the thing that's on their mind? And you know, for some people, it's, hey, remember how we were in school together and, you know, there was a little bit of tension between us, maybe. Why didn't you fuck me? And then other people, it's, I was promised a full can of soda.
Yes. And, yep. So I get it. And I guess humor is subjective. And I find like a lot of humor in really dark things, and this should land for me, and I just don't know why a lot of it doesn't for some reason. I don't know if it's Art's face for some reason. Like, there's just something about, he's a cute little kid, but there's something about his face that by the end of the movie, I'm like, I'm sick of looking at you. And he's a cute kid, and he's a great actor, but after a bit, I'm like, all right, stop with the righteous indignation, kid. You're 11. Sorry. Part of my frustration, he gets all of, like, the most moral lines in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I feel that's definitely a choice. Like, you're giving your son all of, like, the morally most righteous lines in the movie. Like, of course all the homeless persons should have the pill. Like, yes, of course they should. Why is it only, like, this 12-year-old boy that is having that lines? Like, when James is talking to him about, like, this is the line of work I do as a cancer doctor. Like, I've seen people die horrible deaths. Sometimes, like, they're in horrible pain and they choose to die because pain is why people want to die. He's like, you're supposed to help people and you're not helping anyone. And it's like, oh, kid, like, you're not wrong, but you're also 12. It's like, it's not, I don't know, like, to me, well, and I think what a difference, like, 2 years makes. Because this movie comes out in 2019, and the lines about, like, what if the government's wrong? What if the scientists are wrong? Like, what if they're lying to us? Like, that line hits a lot different in 2021 than it does. And I don't think that's any fault of, like, Camille Griffin. Like, I don't think that was not her intention at all to be like, hey, we're anti-vax, or, like, COVID isn't real. Like, that was not her intention. But it's impossible to watch a movie like this and not at least discuss it through that lens in 2021.
Oh yeah, like it definitely hit a lot different on this rewatch, that scene especially, because when he makes the example about his teacher, he's like, oh well, but after break he went and apologized to the kid when he was wrong, versus it's like in this situation that's not really going to get to happen. Like, there's not going to be, like, if they do figure out that this whole thing isn't real, there's not going to be a point to where the government can be like, oh, hey, we apologize for this. There's kind of no going back from this choice. And I think to your point of, like, Art kind of having the most, like, righteous, lines and things like that in this, I think they get away with it because he is a kid. Like, because he still has the ignorance of a kid, like, of only the limited experiences that he's had, the things that he doesn't know about the world. Like whenever James, like, is like, kid, you have no idea about pain, which is, like, kind of it's a little diminutive. It's like, well, no, a kid still feels pain. They still do know. But what he's getting at is like, hey, I've lived another 40 more years than you, and, like, I've kind of seen a little bit more, so his view is a little bit narrow.
James's next line should have been, let me show you about pain. And then he puts him in the figure 4 and then, like, makes the kid tap out. That would have been amazing. That would have been funny. Like, if he suplexes the kid.
But I think that we're getting into the conversation, and this is something that Devon mentioned at the very beginning. It's about autonomy. Mm-hmm. Kids aren't able to make the choice whether they want to take the pill. The parents are the ones saying, no, you're going to. You have to. And even if it is in their best interest, it is stripping someone of their ability to make a choice. And we see that with Sophie when we discover that she's pregnant. She doesn't want to take the pill, but she's taken, by being there, she's part of this group and she's agreed to do this, but she can't change her mind as an adult. I think that's where the complexity of the conversation comes in, because go ahead.
No, you first. I'm sorry. Finish that thought.
Because even a doctor can tell you, like, this is going to be your best treatment. This is what you need to do, but maybe that treatment isn't the one that's right for you. Yeah. For a number of different reasons that the doctor may not be aware of. So it just gets into a lot of those discussions around autonomy and choice. And I think you're exactly right. It hits a lot different looking at it through the lens of 2021 versus had it come out in 2019.
I feel what James does to Sophie is cruel. where he says, like, I'm not going to take this pill unless you do, because it puts her in a position where, like, it kind of removes the choice from her hands because she doesn't want to see him suffer. Like, he knows that her choice was to not take the pill, and he's known that the whole time. And then at the very absolute last moment, when there's no turning back, when she doesn't have any more time to really think about it, he says, like, if you don't take the pill, I'm not going to take it, and I'm going to suffer with you, which she doesn't want to see him do. And that seems really cruel. And you're right, that strips her of her autonomy. I feel like that's different from a parent with their children.
Sure.
Because as a parent, I mean, it's my responsibility. And my daughter is getting older and she's becoming more autonomous, and we try to let her make, even when we feel like it's not necessarily the best choice, we're like, we got to let her fail. Mm-hmm. You know, as long as it's not dangerous, we got to let her fail sometimes.
Yeah, I think the way,
when they're younger, you got to, like, look out for what is their best. It's your responsibility to do what is best for your children, even if it's impossible sometimes to make the right choice.
Yeah, I could see what they were going for with Sophie in kind of linking it to her being pregnant, and, like, then it kind of with, you know, a lot of the conversations that we've had about abortion recently, and, you know, so it's like I can see where they're going. I think the misstep is they could have used this character to do a little bit more to, like, kind of make a bit more of a statement, because, like you said, like, it's then just, like, kind of stripped away from her in the end. Like, he basically does what I hate when people propose to their spouses at large events, like at a concert or a game or something. It's like, no, you're setting them up. Like, that's not fair, you know. Like, you're in your mind, that's a sweet thing, and in James's mind, he's like, oh, I'm trying to be romantic, I'll suffer with you. Not thinking, like, no, she doesn't want to see that for you either, so of course that's going to affect her decision, you know. So it's like I do kind of wish that they did a little bit more tying you know, the autonomy. Like, they kind of they try to have these moments between, like, Art and Sophie, like, of her, like, kind of understanding him to a degree, but I think, yeah, if there's my one quibble with the movie is Sophie's arc isn't as rich and enlightening as it could be.
Yeah. I think part of it, too, is she's very young. Like, that is one, I think it's hinted that she is, like, a very young person. I think at one point, I'm trying to remember, like, on the board,
they make a joke.
They make a pedo reference on the Scrabble board. Kirby does that. And poor Kirby gets completely sidelined. Like, she gets champagne drunk, passes out, and is, like, eliminated from the story until there's, like, 5 minutes left.
But see, I think that there's also the joke at the beginning when James and Sophie first arrives, where they're like, how old is she? 15? Mm-hmm. And like, no, she can't be 15. She's 20. Mm-hmm. But she's still an adult.
Yeah.
And she can make the choices that she wants to make. And I mean, I'm not saying that parents shouldn't be able to make decisions for their kids. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they should. Parents have to operate in the best interests of their kids, and often have more knowledge and foresight into those choices than their kids can have in those moments. So, but I agree with Devon. I think that there could have been a better way to really expand on all of this and make it much more fulfilling, especially related to Sophie, because she's just kind of there as a representation, I think, of something, as opposed to her story being really reflective and connected.
Yeah. So, a couple other things really quick before we wrap up. The goodbye phone call. Like, Devon, you wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a really sad moment as well.
Yeah, that's where the dourness really kicks in. Like, we've had a few moments of tension up to that point, but it's mainly been, like, still them laughing and still partying and all these things. And the Zoom call comes exactly at the 45-minute mark. Like, it's right in the middle of the film. And this is the part that felt the most pandemic-esque to me, because one, like, I mean, who benefited more from the pandemic than Zoom, for one? But then it's this interesting, you know, idea of like, you know, the grandma is separated. We don't exactly know. Like, they say she's far, but they don't exactly explain, you know, why she's not with them. But it's like, you know, they're
Bridge Club.
Yeah, Bridge Club, of course. You know, but it's this interesting idea of like, you know, they're like, you know, it really hits Nell that like, oh, like, because like up to that point, Nell has been pretty light about the whole night and stuff, but then that's when it really, the realness hits her. And it hit me in a way because like me being out here, I'm out in Los Angeles and the rest of my family's in St. Louis. And I had like those difficult decisions whenever pandemic and lockdown were happening. Like, do I go back home and like move back home like some of my other friends were doing? But then I was worried. I was like, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to get the unemployment that way. And then like also if this does end pretty quickly, I don't want to be like kind of stuck back home. But at the same time, there was also the decisions of it was like very dangerous to fly and like before the vaccine and like not and me being worried about getting it. So, but then at one point I was just like, well, no, I still have to risk doing this, you know, flight home. So that way I can at least, you know, have that moment rather than me having to have a, you know, goodbye via Zoom call, you know, with my family, you know, so that moment is what really kind of turned the dourness up for the film. And like for the rest of it, we kind of do have some more like gut punches like that. But like, that was the moment where it's like, yeah, we have been kind of keeping it light, but like, no, this is very, very real.
Yeah, it's rough, and you're exactly right in that. I think it is something that probably resonates with a lot of people, because lots of people had those really difficult conversations. If it wasn't a goodbye conversation, it was, is this a goodbye conversation? Maybe their loved one was sick. And you never know what would happen. And so it is really rough. And I think Nell's reaction to it really hits it home with how hard she's finding it too, because she's been very much like, let's keep this light, you know, truth and love, and let's have this be as positive of an experience. But I think this is where she's wrestling with the reality of, my mom is going to be dead. I'm going to be dead. Everyone in this house is going to be dead.
Yeah. I found too, and remember, this was all filmed before lockdowns and before we would even know what this is going to look like. So how it predicted what the next year was going to look like is pretty remarkable. The mom's sign off of saying, oh, I have to let you go because I got to say goodbye to my girls in Bridge Club, seems like the most British thing to do as well, because the truth is far more terrifying in that, like, oh, the clouds are actually rolling in. And it speaks again to that idea of like not being able to have like the hard conversation, to being able to say like, hey, this is actually the real end for me, and not being able to speak that honest truth. I actually feel it's a little bit meaner and crueler to say like, I have to let you go because Bridge Club, because it almost feels like they take priority over your grandkids and your daughter. I mean, in some way, I think there was you're trying to spare their feelings, but
I mean, I think there was an understanding with like Nell and Simon. They knew what she was alluding to, but like I think it was due to the fact that the kids were on the Zoom call. She's not gonna go, okay, Grandma's about to go inhale the cloud. You know, like you know. So
you're probably right.
So.
Yeah, because art, it's not art. One of the kids is like, no, maybe it is art.
It's art. It's like, call her back.
Call her back,
Art is like, call her back, and he gets adamant about it. It's like, Art, slow your roll, dude.
Yeah, but Simon is very much like, we can't.
Yeah. Would it have been better if like Bridge Club were like two hunky dudes she hired to see her off? You know, that was like, would have been way better. But, you know, that's what Grandma's Bridge Club was, but...
I mean, that is one thing that is kind of missing from this is like, if it's the end of the world, why is nobody fucking? Like, there should have been cutaways to people like fucking in the bathroom. Like, this is your last day on Earth. Like,
that's what Sandra was saying.
Like, that is one that would have been very funny if Grandma's like, okay, boys, one more time. I also would have been tripping balls during this entire thing. Like, you know, Kirby had the right idea, like breaking her sobriety and getting drunk. But like, I would have been like I would have had some Molly on hand. I would have had some acid on hand. Like, I would not have been going out, you know, with a sober mind.
You would have been running into that green cloud, like fucking the wicked. It would have been pretty colors. I found one of the saddest subplots was, you know, Kitty denying her mom like a hug. It just seemed mean and just like, why won't you hug me? Like, you're wearing my college fund on your feet. It's like, oh, well, kid, you're not going to college. Sorry, kid. Like, college ain't in the cards. You didn't even seem that bright anyway. Definitely big Veruca Salt vibes there. And again, what made it worse was like, really, I feel like she didn't even love her dad that much, but she was like over exaggerating her affection for dad in order to dig the knife into mom that much worse. And I am a big believer, like, you know, we have Ada. I'm a big believer in you don't make your kids hug someone just because like someone asks them to do. You don't demand, like, you're a kid, you owe someone affection. It's not right because it just teaches them to be subservient. It can really harm your kid, so you don't do that. But I still found this really heartbreaking, and I found it like when the parents are dying, and she's like, "Please just give me a hug," and she's like, "Nope," and runs out to get her doll, and her parents are like paralyzed, and then when she comes back and they're both dead, that's when she can hug her mom, and. Yeah, that to me was the saddest part of the whole fucking movie.
I still found it very heartbreaking, but it wasn't due to Kitty not loving them. I saw it more as like this was the result of Sandra and Tony not preparing Kitty, you know, for the moment properly. Like throughout the entire movie, they don't really, you know, again, like Sandra is kind of one of the ones that keeps trying to cover up the situation and things like that. And even when they, her and Nell sit down with the kids earlier, like Nell's the one doing the talking and Sandra's just like, oh, you love us, right? You know, so it's like I saw it just as like they didn't prepare Kitty for like, hey, when the moment comes, this is like what's going down. And Kitty still not being able to wrap her head around it, even in the last moment, still being like, oh, wait, no, I got time. I need to get my doll, or I got time. I need to do this. Versus like I never read too much into it. And as far as like her lack of affection for the mother, I thought it was more Sandra's lack of preparation for her.
I think it's a bit of both.
I see that. I also think she's a spoiled kid.
Yeah.
And I think spoiled kids, especially at that age, probably have this idea of, I don't need to worry about anything because that's what parents do. They take care of everything. Nothing's going to affect me. Nothing will hurt me. And they kind of doubled down on that by not preparing her. And so I think she just has this distance of like what is actually happening and what will happen. And I do find it heartbreaking at the very end when you see her kind of cuddled up with her mom. It's very, very, very sad.
Yeah, it is. So the end of this movie, very end, you know, we go through everything. We feel the whole family is dead. You go like that slow roll through the home. You pan to Art's face, and it's an indeterminate amount of time later. Like, we know it's not the next day. Like, the snow is falling. You kind of get the feeling it's maybe been at least a few days, maybe longer. Art opens his eyes. What do we make of the end of this movie with Art surviving? Keira Knightley has said, like, it's supposed to represent the resiliency of the younger generation as they tackle the issue of climate change. I feel like that sounds like a bunch of horse shit, and I'm not buying it. Like, sorry, no, I'm not.
I mean, I don't think it was a couple days because they took the pill. It was around like midnight, 1 a.m. So I assumed it was like maybe like 5 hours later, like when the sun was coming up and like and the snow was falling, because it happened like in the middle of the night whenever everybody was doing the things. But I don't love the ending, because I think it's the movie's already kind of been a bummer this whole time, and I don't think it needs like one extra sting to like make it even worse. Because I think with it being kind of a grim, dour movie, I think it would have been fine that it's just like, oh, our quote unquote happy ending is everyone's dead, at the end. So it's like, I think it would have felt more in line with it. And because I think what they're kind of implying, because they say earlier in the movie, though, like the cloud has hit other places before, so we already know that the cloud does kill people and stuff, so I think the only thing with this was like, I don't think it was revealing that it wasn't real. I think if anything, it was like Art only like somewhat got infected during that one scene, which that's the scene that gets me in this movie, with whenever Art discovers the car and Simon has to get him. That's the scene that breaks me. I thought I was going to get through this rewatch without crying again, but like it got me again. So I think during that scene, he was only like maybe partially infected, and that's why he still woke his eyes up, because I still believe that it's real, because we heard in other instances that it has hit other places already and nobody survived. So like but it just sucks, because like he's going to grow up with his family, and maybe he isn't the only person in the world that didn't take the pill, and maybe there are some survivors, but like, so like, I don't know. I just don't think they needed it to raise these extra questions.
But why do we think that he's come back as Art, in Art form?
I don't think you're meant to think like he's come back as a zombie. I don't think it's
that makes me feel better about
there
it.
are some like deleted scenes and alternate endings that are pretty much the same thing, and it's him kind of going through the home as Art, and I think there's like a radio that plays like, hey, if you survive this, here's where you should go. Like there are other survivors, and it's pretty much a play, like all kind of have the same ending. There's nothing where he like wanders into the street and then like chomps on somebody and then says brains, which, so I don't think it's that kind of movie. I think you're meant to, and I guess that gets to my thing I said earlier, like what a difference a couple years makes. He's the one person who is like, I'm questioning the scientists. Like, what if the good scientist died and we've been left with all the stupid ones that uploaded the wrong files? Like, what if the government is lying to you? What if this is a great government reset? And like, what if we kill off 95% of the population, take all their land and wealth, and we get to keep all of it, and then we'll just start over again? I wouldn't put that past some governments, would you? That is like what it feels like it's possible the end of this movie could be saying, like, based on when it came out, even though it wasn't written or filmed maybe with that intention, it's hard to not read a little bit of that into it.
Well, and I think that it's also the ending that some people have talked about it being more pointed in terms of being anti-vax, because he's the one person who had issues with the pill, and so I don't know. I agree with Devon that it's just one more layer of oh shit to what has been kind of a roller coaster hill of just upsetness. But I kind of like that it just ends on an even sour note of, now here's this kid that is going to see everyone he's been with dead, his family dead, and have to figure out what he is going to do. And I like that the film doesn't even bother, like it ends there. No. We don't have to take a journey to see him connect with other survivors, because this could have been a 2-hour movie and we could have had that, but it cuts off and
it's a nice tight 90.
Yep.
They even make a reference to The Road, Cormac McCarthy and The Road, and they're like, I'm not going through that post-apocalyptic shit. And I think that's great that you don't see that here, that you're not getting any hint of it at the end of this. It's like, nope, he wakes up. Reason I think it's longer than a day is because we know that this cloud, like you said, Devon, has moved on to other places, or it's been to other places. So I'm thinking people are gradually waking up. Maybe not everybody, but some people are waking up from this thing. It's not killing every single person. It might be a crapshoot. Or who knows? Like, maybe it is. And maybe everybody that didn't take the pill after a week or two wakes up and they're just like, man, that sucked. Felt like I puked my brains out, but, I'm okay after that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, I like, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't need, because I don't think every film needs an ambiguous ending,
True.
That's kind of my thing with this. But an interesting parallel is, I totally forgot, Keira Knightley was also in another apocalyptic movie, very similar, Seeking a Best Friend for the End of the World. Which is also a tearjerker and kind of has a similar-ish ending. I totally didn't even think about the parallels between those two. I kind of need to rewatch that movie now.
Excellent. So that is Silent Night, 2021's Silent Night. Not to be confused with the Silent Night remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Not to be confused with 2023 John Woo's Silent Night. So there's a lot to choose from there. And yeah, I think we hammered it home. So Devon, what do you got coming up with Spectre Cinema Club?
Over on Spectre Cinema Club, we got new episodes every Tuesday with me and my buddy Garrett McDowell, and we are currently doing possession movies leading up to the big 50th anniversary of The Exorcist. So we're doing that. We also have some bonus content out right now, as we're going to be launching a Patreon in January. So we have some bonus Patreon episodes that we gave out for free as a Christmas present for you guys. We started off with the original Amityville movie, and we got movies like Event Horizon and Saint Maud also on the docket. So very exciting. Excellent. So make sure you go check us out over there, and you can follow me on all social medias at _DaddyDisco.
Excellent. Nicole, what do you got with Bodies of Horror?
So the most recent episode has been posted, and that is a conversation with Joe Lipsett about Saint Maud. Really delving in kind of like end of life and illness, disability as someone in the LGBTQ community, caregiving, all sorts of complex and interesting topics there. Really great episode. Upcoming episodes might have one on the docket with Devon talking about an absolute mindfuck of a film that I'm so excited to talk about.
What movie?
We're having a real dour weekend here. Like I'm crying a lot this weekend. Jeez Louise.
Yeah, and then Brian, who has also been on Pod and the Pendulum, a guest here, he is going to be talking about we're taking a different track, Serpent in the Rainbow. So I'm super excited about where that conversation is going to go. And then, in January, going to be delving into some light fare, talking about eugenics.
Oh, okay. Light topic to start.
Yeah, I voted that one.
Yeah.
So for us, for the Pod and the Pendulum, you can visit our site, podandthependulum.com, where we have all of our episodes listed. You can leave us, you think we have a little thing there. We've actually gotten some nice comments from folks that are there, and I've actually tried to take a minute to reply to most people that have taken their time to write us. There's also a link there where you can rate, review, and subscribe to us. So please, if you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to us. It goes a long way to listeners finding us. Leave us a 5-star review and a few kind words. That's huge for us. We really appreciate that. If you have not already and have the means to do so, consider becoming a patron of the show. Go to patreon.com/pod and the pendulum. It's where you'll find about 50 hours of bonus content right now. We've posted our Thanksgiving bonus episode on Thanksgiving. I believe for the month of December, we're going to do Godzilla -1, and I'm going to try to get some Christmas bonus content, some Christmas horror content up there as well. So becoming a patron allows you to access like a ton of bonus material, and it goes a long way to us getting a lot of the materials we need to put on the show, allows us to pay for hosting the site, allows us to pay for like running the website. So go to patreon.com/pod and the pendulum. Once we get to 50 patrons, we're putting Hellraiser on the docket. So I want to get to that number at some point in 2024. So I think we're going to start getting pretty aggressive to get there. Thank you so much for being a listener. We really appreciate it. We have a couple more Christmas movies, Christmas horror movies on the docket. We'll be back next week with Krampus. I covered that movie for the patron, so I think we're going to have a different crew talking about that movie. And then we're going to be doing Christmas Evil. The following week on Christmas Day, Stephen and I are covering A Muppet Christmas Carol. After that, it's our top 10 horror movies of the year for the new year. And then we're starting our next franchise in early January. We're covering all of the Universal Frankenstein monster movies, which I'm really excited to cover. I've already started my notes on those, and I think those are going to be some pretty fantastic episodes. Brian and I have got some great stuff in store for that. Thank you so much. Thanks to my co-hosts Brian and Devon. We hope you've enjoyed our topics.